Kievan Rus. Kievan Rus, 8621242, was a medieval political federation located in modern-day Belarus, Ukraine, and part of Russia, the latter named for the Rus, a Scandinavian people. The name Kievan Rus is a modern-day, 19th century, designation but has the same meaning as Land of the Rus, which is how the region was known in the Middle Ages. The Rus ruled from the city of Kyiv, also given as Kyiv, and so Kievan Rus simply meant the lands of the Rus of Kiev. The Rus are first mentioned in the Annals of Saint-Bertin, which records their presence in a diplomatic mission from Constantinople to the court of Louis the Pious, 814 to 840, in 839. The annals claim they were Swedes, and this is possible, but their ethnicity has never been firmly established. The story of the arrival of the Rus in the east is first told in the primary chronicle, also known as the Tale of Bygone Years, c. 12th century, of Russia. This work relates how the people of the land invited the Rus, identified as Scandinavian Vikings, to rule and maintain order in their country in the mid-9th century CE. 3 brothers, including one named Rurik, accepted the invitation and founded the Rurik dynasty, which would last for over 700 years. This version of events is supported in the present day by historians who are labeled Normanists, those who accept a Norse origin for the Rurikid dynasty, and is challenged by so-called anti-Normanists, who argue for a Slavic origin of Russia and the other states. The Normanist claims are presently considered more valid, and it is generally accepted that the Norse leader Rurik, 862 to 879, founded the dynasty which would endure, in an unbroken line, through the reign of Ivan IV, first Tsar of Russia, 1547 to 1584, also known as Ivan the Terrible. The state of Kievan Rus fell to the Mongols between 1237 to 1242 CE, breaking the region in pieces which eventually developed into the modern states of Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. The Russian primary chronicle was probably completed by 1113 at Kyiv and was once attributed to the monk Nestor, 1056 to 1114, but is now thought to be a compilation of earlier works possibly edited by Nestor. The earliest surviving manuscript dates from 1377 with editorial notes substantiating the earlier date of the work. The chronicle is regularly alluded to as historical narrative, but this has been challenged as it contains a number of mythic or legendary aspects. Even so, archaeological evidence from the region supports many, though not all, of the events it describes. The work begins by claiming that, after the biblical Great Flood, the sons of Noah, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, divided the world between them, and Japheth received the region of Kievan Rus as part of his allotment. What Japheth did to establish order in his lands is not mentioned, but the chronicle relates that the people fought with each other and eventually were subjugated by the Khazars of Central Asia, Turkey, and the Varangians, Vikings, of Scandinavia. The Slavs of the region were forced to pay tribute to the Khazars and the Varangians until they drove the Varangians out but maintained the relationship with the Khazars. Afterwards, however, they found that they could not govern themselves and the tribute paid to the Khazars was too great. Even though they had been tired of paying the Varangians, they recognized that life may have been better under their protection. 2 years after their arrival, the 2 younger brothers died and Rurik took their regions as his own with his capital at Novgorod. 2 men of Rurik's group, Askold and Dayar, asked him for permission to leave the land and seek their fortunes at Tsargrad, Constantinople, and were given leave. On their way to Tsargrad they stopped at a city on a hill called Kyiv, conquered it, and then began raiding the surrounding area in true Viking fashion. The chronicle credits them with the famous attack on Constantinople involving 200 Viking ships, which was driven off, after much slaughter, by a storm said to have been sent by God. The historical date of this raid, however, does not fit with the rest of the narrative. In Novgorod, Rurik died of natural causes and entrusted his young son Igor to the care of his kinsman Oleg, also known as Oleg of Novgorod, and Oleg the Prophet, r. 879 to 912. Who succeeded him. Oleg began a series of military campaigns from Novgorod, conquering and consolidating the surrounding lands. He came at last to Kiev and saw how Askold and Dayar were amassing enormous wealth through raids. He tricked them both into coming out of the city, killed them, and took control of the region, moving the capital from Novgorod to Kiev at this time, c. 882. Through negotiations and military strength, he convinced a number of tribes and settlements to stop paying tribute to the Khazars and pay him instead. By the time his reign ended, Oleg had vastly expanded Rus' control of the region and filled Kiev's treasury. He was known as Oleg the Prophet, which actually translates as Oleg the Priest, due to a prophecy concerning his death. It was foretold that Oleg would be killed by a beautiful horse he owned, but which he never dared to ride because of the prophecy. He ordered the horse sent away, but provided that it would always be well fed and cared for. Once he had conquered the surrounding regions and made lucrative treaties, especially with Constantinople, he felt confident of his reign, scoffed at the prophecy and asked his advisors what had ever happened to the horse that was supposed to kill him. He was told it had died and Oleg asked to be brought to the horse's bones. Once there, he mocked the prophecy and stamped on the horse's skull, startling a serpent beneath which bit him on the foot and killed him. He was succeeded by Igor of Kiev, 912 to 945, Rurik's son, whom he had raised. Igor was married to a Varangian woman named Olga sometime before he came to power. Like his adopted father, Igor engaged in successful military campaigns and exacted tribute from the conquered. In time, however, he found that all the wealth he had amassed was not enough for him and imposed heavier tribute on the people. He was finally assassinated by the tribe known as the Drevlians for his greed. His son, Sviatoslav I, 945 to 972, was too young to take the throne, and so Olga served as his regent between 945 to 963. Olga's first order of business was to punish the Drevlians for killing her husband. The Drevlians sent word they wanted her to marry their prince Mai, and Olga seemed to agree and requested emissaries. These she killed by tricking them into being carried in a boat which she then had dumped into a pit, and they were buried alive. She then entreated the wisest men of the Drevlians to come to her, invited them to bathe upon their arrival, and set the bathhouses on fire, burning them to death. She then asked the Drevlians to prepare a funeral feast to honor Igor, allowed them all to get drunk, and had her soldiers slaughter everyone there. The surviving Drevlians took refuge in the city of Iskorostan, where Igor had been killed, and Olga laid siege to it. When she could not take it, she said she would impose the lightest terms of surrender on the city and asked only for 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each home. These were quickly given, and she had her soldiers attach a piece of hot sulfur by a thread to the birds and then release them to return to their nests in the city. These nests in the eaves of houses, and coops, and elsewhere all caught fire at once, and Iskorostan was consumed. Olga killed or sold into slavery most of the survivors, but spared others so they could continue to pay tribute. Olga abdicated in favor of Sviatoslav I 963 and retired to Kiev to spend the rest of her life in domestic duties. Sviatoslav I quickly began a course of military campaigns even greater than those of Oleg and Igor to expand his territory and control trade routes. He conquered Khazaria first, which had long been a rival power, and then the Volga Bulgars, the Alans, and the Danube Bulgars, until he had more than tripled his kingdom in size. He was assassinated returning to Kiev from one such campaign, and his sons Yerepok I, 972 to 980, Oleg, and Vladimir fought for the crown. Oleg was killed, and, when Yerepok I took power, Vladimir fled to Norway to the court of his relative Håkon Sigurdsson, 972 to 995. Here he gathered a force of Varangians and bided his time until he felt ready to return and take back the kingdom. He defeated Yerepok I's armies and killed his brother in an ambush. Vladimir followed the example of his father and embarked on a number of military campaigns to either expand the kingdom or secure certain areas. Throughout these marches and battles, he had pagan shrines erected to honor local or national deities. At about this time, 987, Basil II of the Byzantine Empire, 976-1025, asked Vladimir for military aid to defend his throne from two challengers, one of whom, Bardas Phocas, had already declared himself emperor. Vladimir agreed and then either asked for, or was offered, Basil II's sister and in marriage. The marriage was approved on the condition that Vladimir convert to Christianity. This pact resulted in the Christianization of Kievan Rus and the establishment of the Varangian Guard in the Byzantine Empire. Vladimir sent 6,000 Varangians to Basil II in Constantinople c. 988, and these would become the elite bodyguard of Byzantine emperors and a formidable body of shock troops from that time until the beginning of the 14th century. Another version of Vladimir's conversion claims that he had lost faith in his pagan gods and sent emissaries to different nations to talk to the clergy about their religious beliefs and practices. After researching Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, he selected Eastern Orthodox Christianity because of the beauty of the churches of Constantinople and there is no prohibition on alcohol or eating pork. This story was created most likely to distance Vladimir's conversion from a simple marriage contract and emphasize his independence from foreign influences. Although he may have initially agreed to convert simply to form an alliance, Vladimir quickly embraced Christianity's best values. He made provision for the poor of his kingdom and made himself personally available to help anyone, no matter their social status. He founded schools to encourage literacy and improved the lives of his people in every respect. Trade flourished and the economy boomed under Vladimir, who also founded cities and built numerous churches.